Erev Shabbos. Hope everyone's well. A few days ago, a man in Cambridge, Massachusetts was arrested for pulling a knife and shouting at a jogger who was 40 feet away from him to get the expletive on the other side of the street. And the man with the knife who had threatened the jogger had his two young children with him at the time when he did this. Earlier in April, a man, a doctor of medicine, in fact, an MD, physically attacked 4 young women in Louisville, Kentucky, for not keeping their distance sufficiently. A few days earlier, at the end of March, an elderly woman in the emergency room of a Brooklyn hospital was a little bit dizzy in the emergency room in the ER, and she accidentally grabbed onto the IV pole of another patient. The 32-year-old woman, the patient, whose IV bag she grabbed, got so angry that she pushed this older woman to the ground, who subsequently hit her head and died. Now, we're living in a really strange time. Just a couple of months ago, if you told me that the most common form of communication between strangers in public places would be dirty looks and angry rebukes, I would not have believed you. And yet that is where we are. As social distancing rules have become stricter and fear about contracting or spreading the novel coronavirus has grown, so have our collective reactions become more and more extreme when we judge that others are not following social distancing rules properly. Public shaming of people who do not socially distance has been dubbed quarantine shaming, and it's all over the place. We could see it everywhere in the media. It's become almost completely socially acceptable to shout at strangers in the park for playing baseball with their large family, people that they live with, shouting at large families just walking together on the street. Even government officials are starting to do this. The governor of New Jersey threatened to use government resources to publicly shame people who have parties or violate social distancing policies. The mayor of New York City publicly called out the entire Jewish community as a monolith because of a single funeral held in Brooklyn that did not properly maintain the rules of social distancing throughout. He then, the next day, sent police officers to give out dozens of summonses to Jews who they thought were not social distancing properly. And I'll admit that I myself have had the urge to engage in this kind of public shaming. For the past week, I've seen outside the same group of college kids playing touch football at a local park with as many as 10 or even 15 people together. And it's clear, it's obvious to anyone who's looking that these people do not come from one single household, and it's likely that they were or have been spreading the virus to each other. And during this time, I've had half a mind to go up, not too close, but to go closer to them and shout at them and tell them off for committing murder, for killing people in nursing homes and because of spreading the virus. Now, I didn't do that. And instead, after nothing's changed for a week, I ended up feeling like I needed to do something, so I called 311 to ask whether this was something that I needed to report. The truth is that I'm not even sure whether that was the right thing to do either. The point is that we're all suddenly either engaged in or the recipients of rebuke in ways that were unimaginable just a few weeks ago. Now, rebuke is not an inherently bad thing. In fact, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to rebuke our fellow citizens. It's a mitzvah that we're going to read about in the Parsha this week, in Parshat Kedoshim. Lo tisna et achicha behovecha. You should not hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tochech et amitecha v'lo tisa lav chet. Rebuke your fellow person, your fellow citizen, and do not carry upon him sin, whether it's carry for him, be blamed for his sin, or allow him to sin is a little unclear, but that's what the pasuk says. Rebuke your fellow citizen. Now, there are several ways to understand the logic behind the mitzvah of rebuke. The Sefer HaChinuch suggests that rebuking another person is something that's cathartic for the person doing the rebuking. If you see someone acting inappropriately or sinning and you don't say something now, the anger is just going to build up in you. You'll come to hate the person and you might even act out in violence against them. And the Chinuch proves this theory from the story of Avshalom, the son of King David, who was angry at his half-brother Amnon, justifiably, for attacking his sister, and he stayed silent and didn't do anything about it, and eventually he murdered his brother Amnon. Now, if that is the case, if that's the logic behind this mitzvah, then quarantine shaming, at least if it's done in person rather than on social media, and it doesn't create any danger for the person that you're shaming, maybe that's a legitimate behavior. It provides people who are very worried about social distancing an outlet to express their frustration without resorting to violence or doing anything otherwise dangerous. Rabbi Sachs points out that the Gemara in Bava Metzia implies that the goal of the mitzvah of rebuke is not to give you, the rebuker, an outlet for your anger, but rather the purpose of having a mitzvah of rebuke is to hold every single Jewish person accountable for the bad actions of their fellow person. If you are aware of corruption, of immorality, of offensive behavior by another person, and you stay silent, and you just watch idly by, then you become complicit and guilty by association. The Gemara says that the Torah uses a double formulation of rebuke, hochiach tuchiach, to inform us that not only is a teacher or a leader of a community obligated to rebuke his or her students or constituency for their bad behavior, but the reason it doubles the formulation is to tell us that a student, that an average person is obligated to rebuke the teacher, the leader too. In other words, average citizens cannot be afraid to speak up when they see something being done wrong, especially when that behavior is done wrong by leaders or people of authority. We need to be critical followers, critical lay people, and not just bystanders. But Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky makes another very important point about this mitzvah of tochacha in his commentary Emet Liyaakov. He notes that the Gemara in Erchin asks how far a person needs to go to rebuke another person. How much do they need? What's the standard? How far do they need to go? At what point can they say, okay, I can stop now? Now, one opinion in the Gemara is that you continue rebuking the person who needs to be rebuked until they get angry at you for it. The second opinion is that you only stop when they start cursing at you. And the third opinion is that you only stop when they're about to hit you, when they're about to act violently. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asks, is the point of the mitzvah of tochacha, of rebuke, is that we are supposed to act as vigilantes, as God's representatives, in policing our fellow people's behavior, our fellow person's behavior, in keeping others in line with the Torah's laws. If that's the point of the mitzvah, then why is there any limit to it? Why should we not bravely continue to rebuke others even in the face of danger? Moreover, Rashi in his commentary on this mitzvah quotes the Talmud as saying that you should rebuke a fellow person, a fellow citizen, as long as it doesn't become malbin chavero pnei chavero barabim, as long as you don't end up publicly shaming the person that you're rebuking. Asks Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, why not? Why shouldn't we publicly rebuke him? If the person is violating God's word, and we are charged with preserving the Torah and its observance, if that's what rebuke is all about, why don't we embarrass them for it? Says Rav Kamenetsky, apparently rebuke is neither for our own cathartic benefits, nor for the benefit of the Ribono Shel Olam and his Torah. That's not why we engage in tochacha. We are only supposed to rebuke other people when it's done for the benefit of the people we're rebuking, for their benefit. And that is why, he says, the mitzvah is placed right next to the prohibitions against hatred, revenge, and grudges. That is why it's placed in a verse that immediately precedes the obligation of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, of loving our fellow person unconditionally and completely like we do ourselves. The Rambam writes that when we approach someone for tochacha, when we go to rebuke somebody, it has to be done in a gentle way, and we have to specifically mention, we have to inform the person that we're rebuking that we are saying everything that we're saying l'tovato. We're saying it for their benefit, l'havio l'chayil hamaba, to bring them into life, into the next world. Publicly shaming people, cursing them, threatening them, and otherwise approaching others with an air of superiority and disdain is not only ineffective, but it achieves the opposite of the purpose of this mitzvah. Now, I'm very aware of the reason that people are rebuking those who aren't social distancing. We're doing it because of the danger that the virus poses to others and to ourselves. I understand that not socially distancing can be dangerous, but we still can rethink our approach. That maybe we can align the way that we do tochacha more with the goals of the mitzvah according to the Torah as explained by Rav Kamenetsky. That instead of just thinking about how other people's behavior affects us, we should think about how our behavior and their behavior affects them, affects the people that we're rebuking. Is there a way to encourage social distancing with kindness, care, and concern for the non-social distancer rather than doing it with anger? Is there something that I can do to maintain social distancing with that person without resorting to shouting or anger at them? Is there something that I may not know about the situation that that person's in that might explain why he or she isn't following the rules that I expect them to? And during this period of social separation, we are increasingly alienated from each other and thinking of other people as sources of danger. We're at risk of losing our empathy muscles to atrophy, of being unable to think about a situation from another person's perspective and understanding how the way we talk to them and the way that we approach them, that is going to affect how they think of social distancing. It's going to affect our relationship with them, and it affects whether our behavior is justified at all. And so maybe the next time that we see someone who is not meeting our standards of behavior, of social distancing, we should think twice about whether the rebuke that is at the tip of our tongues, whether it reflects care and concern for the person that we're talking to as well, and not just for ourselves. Thank you. Have a safe and enjoyable Shabbos.